That's what you owe.
Mm.
That's a slippery slope.
Why?
Because from everything that I've read, the WNBA has never turned
statements. You know, they came out there with T-shirts that said, "Pay us what you owe us."
That's right. Right now, they're going through their collective bargaining right now for next year, and that includes, you know, TV, the jerseys, the merch, and all that other.
But they got a big TV deal that they just signed, a $2.2 billion TV deal. I do wonder what they're owed, though. I mean, because, you know, the shirt says "Pay us like you owe us." I was thinking that was that they shortened the Jay-Z line, "Pay us like you owe us." Well, no, that's not the same thing. Well, but pay us what you owe us. I wonder what they're owed.
I'm not sure.
I wonder.
Owe you insinuates that you have not been given something that you have earned. A futures contract is not owing you. A contract that you are currently negotiating is not owing you. They paid you what they owed. This is how dumb the WNBA is, and I haven't seen anybody really talk about this.
Up, girls, like fast.
This is crazy, y'all. I got Shannon Sharpe, Colin Cowherd, Dan from Outkick, Marcellus Wiley. Everybody's going in.
One. If you thought Shannon Sharpe was done making controversial statements about women's basketball, you were dead wrong. The former ESPN host just dropped the most thought-provoking take about WNBA salaries that has the entire basketball world split down the middle. And honestly, he might have a point that nobody wants to admit. His comments about the "Pay Us What You Owe Us" campaign have sparked a massive debate that's forcing everyone to confront some uncomfortable truths about sports economics, and whether the league is ready for the salary revolution players are demanding. During a recent episode of his Nightcap podcast, Shannon Sharpe made what many are calling a controversial statement about WNBA player salaries. But when you actually break down his argument, it starts making a lot more sense than the outrage mob wants to admit. Shannon pointed out that asking for massive pay increases when a league has never turned a profit creates what he called a slippery slope situation. And he's absolutely right about the basic economics here.
The WNBA players get 9.3% of the league revenue. NBA, NHL, NFL players get 50% of the revenue. The WNBA did lose $40 million in 2024.
See, that's crazy. You haven't turned no profits, son.
I know that the league's been around for 20 years. I know that it's lost money for a very, very long time here. I know they're saying like $40 million in losses potential. Now, $200 million in revenue is the total. $40 million in losses. The immediate reaction is whenever you say "pay us what you owe us," it's like, you're all making.
The WNBA lost $40 million in 2024 alone, despite breaking attendance and viewership records, which raises legitimate questions about whether the current business model can support the salary demands players are making. Shannon wasn't trying to diminish the players' value or hard work. He was simply pointing out that you can't pay what you don't have. And that's a conversation the league needs to have honestly, instead of just shouting down anyone who brings up financial reality. Here's where Shannon's argument gets really interesting, and why the immediate backlash against him feels so unfair. The WNBA has been operating for nearly 30 years without turning a consistent profit, which means every dollar paid to players is essentially subsidized by either the NBA or private investors who are bleeding money. Current players receive 9.3% of league revenue, which sounds low compared to the 50% that NFL and NBA players get. But those leagues actually generate enough revenue to make those percentages meaningful. When Shannon questioned whether it's sustainable to dramatically increase player salaries in a league that's already losing tens of millions annually, he was asking the kind of tough questions that business analysts should be asking.
Thinking I might have saw something that said NBA players get 9% of NBA revenue, WNBA
No,
revenue.
that's the WNBA. Get 9% of the revenue.
Let's get that up a little bit more. That's all.
I want them to keep doing this, but the guilt trip on the NBA every single year, when it's 27 years later and y'all in your best year still lost $40 million.
Good.
4-0.
God, in your best year, you lost 40.
Listen, NBA players make 50% of revenues. WNBA players make 9%. And now the merch sales are up 500% and attendance is up, 40%.
You will get a raise, and they will get a raise. That media rights deal will give them a raise. But you're not making NBA money. You're not, the highest paid salary, my gut calculation, I say gut calculation, but I've actually done the math. I think the max deal is going to be around $700,000.
The problem is that in today's social media environment, asking practical questions about economics gets you labeled as anti-women or anti-progress, even when you're just trying to have an honest conversation about financial sustainability. Shannon's co-host Chad Johnson immediately pushed back against these points. And while his passion for supporting the league is admirable, His arguments revealed exactly why this debate has become so emotionally charged instead of staying focused on facts. Chad talked about seeing packed arenas and growing fan interest, which is absolutely true and incredibly encouraging for the league's future. But attendance and excitement don't automatically translate to profitability, or the ability to dramatically increase payroll. Johnson's response was pure emotion and optimism, which feels good but doesn't address the fundamental business questions Shannon was raising. The contrast between Shannon's analytical approach and Chad's emotional reaction perfectly captured why this conversation has become so polarized, with one side focused on financial reality and the other on what feels morally right. This is where the conversation took a fascinating turn that actually proves Shannon was approaching this topic with an open mind rather than a closed agenda. When someone brought up the fact that the WNBA's television deal is jumping from $45 million to $200 million annually starting in 2026, Shannon immediately acknowledged that this changes everything and makes player salary increases much more realistic. Critics are calling this a flip-flop, but it's actually exactly what you want from someone having an honest discussion about economics, changing your position when new information becomes available. Shannon's willingness to adjust his stance based on the TV deal news shows he was never anti-player or anti-WNBA. He was just working with incomplete information about the league's financial future. The fact that he immediately embraced higher player salaries once the revenue picture became clearer proves his original concerns were about math, not ideology. What Shannon understood better than most of his critics is that sustainable growth requires matching expenses to revenue, and the WNBA has been struggling with this balance for decades. The league's recent explosion in popularity, driven largely by stars like Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and others, represents an incredible opportunity. But it also creates pressure to make financial decisions based on excitement rather than careful planning.
26, they're going to go from getting $45 million annually for TV to $200 million annually.
Yay, there we go. Now we talking. Now we talking business.
But
pay us what you owe.
What are we doing? Again, they thought they'd wear those shirts and everybody be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And instead, the intelligent sports fans all collectively went, your league doesn't make a profit. What? That was the response. Your league makes no money and is subsidized by the NBA. What?
The sport got to survive on its own, or it won't be a sport. It will be a charity.
Oh my God, Marcel.
Shannon's slippery slope comment wasn't about limiting player earning potential. It was about making sure the league doesn't get ahead of itself financially and end up in an even worse position down the road. Professional sports history is littered with leagues that expanded too quickly or increased expenses faster than revenue growth. And Shannon was essentially warning against repeating those mistakes. His business-first approach might not be as emotionally satisfying as immediately maxing out player salaries, but it's the kind of thinking that actually protects the league's long-term viability. One of the most interesting aspects of Shannon's comments came when he started talking about potential WNBA franchise ownership and the rising valuations of existing teams. Critics jumped on this as hypocrisy, suggesting he was contradicting himself by viewing the league as a good investment while questioning player salary increases. But this actually shows a sophisticated understanding of business dynamics. You can absolutely believe that a league has tremendous growth potential and rising asset values, while also believing that current cash flow doesn't support dramatic payroll increases yet.
To $200 million annually. This will result in essence the league making money overnight and losing $40 million to a net gain of $115 just alone in TV deals. Even if game tickets sold were to stop growing, the merch stopped selling, it will still be in the green.
Caitlin Clark's already rich. She made $11 million this year alone in endorsements off the court. So regardless of how these negotiations go, she's set. Nobody else is.
The media rights deals are insane. They're insane in the NBA. That's why the contracts are insane. Major League Baseball, all these regional sports networks paid these teams and paid up along with the national broadcast, and the Major League Baseball salaries are...
Women support each other.
You know why we know they don't? That's why we're in the situation that we're in. Because if women supported each other, it would be more. That's the problem.
Okay.
The women ain't supporting the women in the WNBA.
Well, the math works out to $347,000 per player. That's the share of their profits. That's probably what they would have to pay up for them to make a profit. We actually looked at that earlier. It's $213,000 that the players ought to pay back to the league at this point. Now, that'd be a lot more when you consider how long they haven't.
Shannon's interest in team ownership actually validates his support for the league's future while maintaining realistic expectations about current financial constraints. Smart investors often see long-term value in assets that aren't immediately profitable, and that's exactly the perspective Shannon was bringing to this discussion. The timing of Shannon's comments, right in the middle of crucial collective bargaining negotiations, has led to criticism that he was undermining players during a critical period. But this criticism misses the bigger picture of what these negotiations are really about. The current CBA expires in October 2025, and players are rightfully fighting for their fair share of a growing pie. But Shannon's questions about financial sustainability are exactly the kinds of issues that will determine whether any new agreement actually works long-term. Ignoring economic reality during negotiations doesn't help players. It sets them up for disappointment if the league can't deliver on promises that weren't based on solid financial foundations. Shannon's willingness to ask tough questions about league finances, even during sensitive negotiation periods, shows respect for players by treating them as intelligent professionals who deserve honest conversations about what's actually possible, rather than empty promises that can't be kept. The immediate backlash against Shannon's comments on social media perfectly illustrates why nuanced discussions about sports economics have become almost impossible in today's environment. Instead of engaging with his actual arguments about financial sustainability and business growth, critics focused on taking individual quotes out of context and accusing him of being anti-women or anti-progress. The viral tweets and video clips completely ignored the parts of his discussion where he expressed support for player salary increases once the revenue picture improved, focusing only on the slippery slope comment to paint him as an enemy of women's sports. This kind of mob response actually hurts the WNBA because it shuts down the exact conversations the league needs to have about sustainable growth and realistic financial planning. When you actually break down the numbers Shannon was discussing, his concerns about current salary demands become much more understandable and legitimate. The WNBA currently operates with revenues around $60 million annually. That means giving players 50% of revenue, like in other major sports, would result in about $30 million in total player salaries, which actually isn't that much higher than current levels when spread across 12 teams and roughly 144 players. The real issue isn't the percentage of revenue sharing, it's the total revenue pie. That's why Shannon's focus on business sustainability and growth was actually more pro-player than the emotional responses demanding immediate massive salary increases. Players will benefit much more from a league that doubles or triples its total revenue over the next 5 years than from getting a bigger percentage of the current, smaller pie. And that's exactly the point Shannon was making. Shannon's approach to WNBA economics reflects his understanding of how every major professional sports league has developed over time, starting with modest revenues and player salaries that grew gradually as the business matured. The NFL didn't start paying players millions of dollars immediately, and the NBA went through decades of financial struggles before becoming the revenue powerhouse it is today. Shannon's caution about dramatically increasing WNBA player salaries before the revenue can support those increases shows respect for this historical pattern and an understanding that sustainable growth requires patience and smart business decisions. Critics who want to skip the development phase and jump straight to massive salaries might have good intentions, but they're ignoring the business realities that determine whether a professional league can survive and thrive long-term. One of the most sophisticated aspects of Shannon's analysis was his recognition that franchise valuations can increase even while operational losses continue, which is exactly what's happening with WNBA teams right now. The Golden State Valkyries were valued at $500 million despite the league's operational challenges, proving that investors see long-term value even in the current financial environment. Shannon understood that this creates an opportunity for smart business decisions that balance immediate player needs with long-term league sustainability. His interest in potential ownership wasn't contradictory to his salary concerns. It showed an understanding that building value requires making decisions based on future potential rather than current cash flow alone. Chad Johnson's observations about packed arenas and growing fan interest represent one side of the growth equation. But Shannon's focus on translating that interest into sustainable revenue represents the other, equally important side. Having enthusiastic fans is absolutely crucial for league success, but converting that enthusiasm into the kind of revenue streams that can support dramatically higher player salaries requires sophisticated business planning and realistic timelines. Shannon's questions about whether current growth can support immediate, massive salary increases weren't dismissing fan enthusiasm. They were asking how to build on that enthusiasm in ways that actually benefit players financially over the long term. The most pro-player position isn't always the one that sounds the most supportive emotionally. Sometimes it's the one that focuses on building a business foundation that can support player prosperity for decades. What Shannon was really advocating for was strategic patience in building the WNBA into a league that can support the kind of player salaries everyone wants to see. His slippery slope concerns reflected an understanding that rushing into salary commitments before the revenue infrastructure can support them might feel good short-term but could create serious problems that hurt players in the long term. The upcoming television deal that dramatically increases league revenue validates Shannon's approach of tying salary increases to actual revenue growth, rather than emotional arguments about fairness or what players deserve in theory. His willingness to immediately embrace higher salaries once the TV deal was mentioned proves he was never opposed to players earning more money. He just wanted to make sure the business foundation was solid enough to support those increases sustainably. Shannon's entire approach to this WNBA salary discussion reflected someone thinking about the league's success over the next decade, not just the next season. And that kind of long-term thinking is exactly what the league needs from influential voices in sports media. His questions about financial sustainability and business growth weren't attacks on players or the league. They were attempts to have the kind of serious conversations that successful businesses require. The backlash against his comments shows how difficult it's become to discuss women's sports economics honestly without being accused of bias or discrimination. But those honest discussions are essential for building the kind of sustainable success that will ultimately benefit everyone involved.
Shannon deserves credit for being willing to ask tough questions and adjust his positions based on new information, rather than just saying what sounds good emotionally. Shannon's understanding of how professional sports leagues develop sustainable business models becomes even more impressive when you examine the specific challenges facing the WNBA compared to other expansion efforts in American sports. The league is essentially trying to accomplish in 30 years what took the NFL and NBA decades longer to achieve, building a national fan base, television audience, and revenue streams that can support professional athlete salaries in a completely different media environment than when those leagues were developing. Shannon recognized that this accelerated timeline creates unique pressures and opportunities that require sophisticated business thinking rather than simple emotional appeals for immediate salary maximization. His focus on matching salary growth to actual revenue development shows an understanding that the WNBA's success depends on building something sustainable, rather than something that looks good temporarily but can't be maintained long-term. The television deal that changed Shannon's perspective on WNBA salary possibilities represents exactly the kind of fundamental business shift that validates his analytical approach to league economics. Going from $45 million to $200 million annually in media rights doesn't just represent more money. It represents a complete transformation of the league's financial foundation that makes previously impossible salary structures suddenly realistic and sustainable. Shannon's immediate adjustment of his position when this information became available proves he was never ideologically opposed to higher player salaries. He was just insisting that those increases be based on actual revenue capacity rather than wishful thinking or political pressure. The media rights explosion also validates his long-term thinking, because building toward that kind of breakthrough required years of steady growth and smart business decisions rather than emotional reactions to short-term financial pressures. One aspect of the WNBA's recent growth that Shannon understood better than most commentators is how individual star players can completely transform a league's economic prospects, and why protecting that growth requires careful financial planning rather than immediate gratification. Caitlin Clark's impact on attendance, television ratings, and merchandise sales represents exactly the kind of game-changing development that can justify dramatic salary increases, but only if the league handles the transition intelligently. Shannon's emphasis on sustainable growth rather than immediate salary maximization shows understanding that the Clark effect needs to be leveraged into long-term revenue streams, rather than just short-term salary bumps that might not be sustainable if her popularity doesn't translate into permanent league growth. His business-first approach actually protects players like Clark by ensuring the league builds infrastructure that can support star-level salaries consistently, not just temporarily. Shannon's analysis of WNBA salary structures also reflected a sophisticated understanding of how dramatic pay increases can affect competitive balance and league-wide health, issues that emotional supporters of immediate salary maximization often ignore. Professional sports leagues work best when multiple teams can compete for championships and star players. But if salary increases aren't carefully managed, they can create situations where only a few wealthy markets can afford top talent. Shannon's measured approach to salary growth protects the league's competitive integrity by ensuring that revenue increases are distributed in ways that benefit all teams and players, rather than just creating a few super teams that dominate while others struggle financially. This kind of long-term thinking about league structure and competitive balance shows exactly why Shannon's business perspective was more sophisticated than the emotional reactions that dominated social media discussions. The revenue streams that will ultimately support higher WNBA player salaries extend far beyond television deals and ticket sales. They encompass corporate sponsorships, merchandise agreements, and partnership deals that require exactly the kind of steady business growth Shannon was advocating. Major corporations are increasingly interested in women's sports partnerships, but they need to see sustainable audience growth and professional league management rather than just emotional appeals about fairness or short-term popularity spikes. Shannon's focus on building legitimate business foundations creates exactly the kind of environment that attracts serious corporate investment, which ultimately provides more resources for player compensation than emotional arguments ever could. His understanding that corporate partners evaluate long-term stability and growth potential shows why his analytical approach serves player interests better than demands for immediate salary increases that might not be sustainable. Shannon's vision for sustainable WNBA growth also encompasses the league's potential for international expansion and global audience development, opportunities that require exactly the kind of patient business building he was advocating, rather than short-term financial decisions that might compromise long-term growth potential. Women's basketball has tremendous international appeal, and the WNBA is positioned to become a global league if it makes smart business decisions over the next decade. However, international expansion requires financial stability and proven business models that can be replicated in different markets, which means the league needs to perfect its domestic operations before taking on the additional complexities of global growth. Shannon's emphasis on sustainable domestic success creates the foundation for international opportunities that could ultimately provide far more player compensation than rushing into salary increases that strain current resources. The future of sports media consumption is rapidly shifting towards streaming platforms and digital engagement, creating revenue opportunities that didn't exist when traditional sports leagues were developing their business models. Shannon's forward-thinking approach to WNBA economics positions the league to take advantage of these technological shifts rather than being trapped by traditional revenue limitations. Streaming services are actively seeking premium content to attract subscribers, and women's sports represent an undervalued market that could generate substantial revenue through the right partnerships and content strategies. Shannon's focus on building sustainable business practices creates exactly the kind of professional operation that streaming platforms want to partner with, potentially opening revenue streams that could support player salaries far beyond what traditional television and attendance could provide. One of the most important long-term considerations in Shannon's approach to WNBA economics involves the league's role in developing youth basketball programs and building future generations of fans and players. Sustainable league growth requires investing in grassroots development and youth engagement, which means allocating resources for programs that might not generate immediate revenue, but create long-term value.
This kind of strategic thinking about building lasting foundations shows exactly why Shannon's measured approach to salary increases serves everyone's long-term interests better than emotional demands for immediate maximization. The WNBA's growth potential also depends on upgrading facilities and infrastructure to match the professional standards fans expect from major sports leagues, investments that require exactly the kind of financial planning Shannon was advocating. Many WNBA teams currently play in facilities that were designed for other purposes, limiting their ability to generate revenue through premium seating, corporate partnerships, and game day experiences that drive profitability in other sports. Shannon's emphasis on sustainable business growth creates the financial foundation necessary for facility upgrades and infrastructure improvements that ultimately benefit both players and fans. His understanding that building professional quality operations requires balancing multiple financial priorities shows why his analytical approach creates more opportunities for everyone involved than emotional demands for immediate salary increases that might prevent other necessary investments. Looking at the complete context of Shannon's WNBA salary comments, from his initial concerns through his adjustment based on new TV deal information, reveals someone genuinely trying to think through the complex economics of professional women's sports, rather than just taking easy political positions. His business-focused approach might not generate the same emotional satisfaction as demanding immediate maximum salaries for all players, but it reflects the kind of thinking that actually builds sustainable prosperity in professional athletics. The WNBA's incredible growth trajectory, combined with the upcoming revenue increases from television and other sources, creates exactly the kind of environment where Shannon's measured approach to salary increases makes the most sense. Players will ultimately benefit more from a league that grows intelligently and sustainably than from one that makes emotional decisions that can't be supported long-term. And Shannon deserves recognition for having the courage to advocate for long-term success, even when it meant facing criticism from people who preferred emotionally satisfying but financially unrealistic immediate solutions. If you think Shannon Sharpe was actually making valid points about WNBA economics that got unfairly attacked, comment Shannon right below and let me know your thoughts on whether the league should prioritize immediate salary increases or long-term financial sustainability. Don't forget to smash that like button if you appreciate honest conversations about sports business rather than just emotional reactions to complex economic issues.